Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And here at the very top of the show, recording here maybe for the first time on a Saturday night. I don't know. You'll get this show on a Wednesday or a Thursday, depending on where you are. But we're recording on a Saturday. But let's hand it over to Joy because I believe she has some music news.
So I just came across this and I thought it was pretty cool. Me and Tim are both into space and things of that nature. So, you know how they have, like, whatever their telescopes, they have different data that they're collecting. Well, they now have taken that data and made it into music you can play, and they've made sheet music out of it. So basically, since 2020, the Sonification Project and NASA's X-ray Center has translated digital data taken by a telescope into notes and sounds. This process allows the listener to experience the data through the sense of hearing instead of images, which is the most common way that, you know, data would be presented. But a new phase has been entered, and basically they're putting all of this data into sheet music so people can play it.
Well, that's interesting. You know, what's funny is like NASA is probably the only government agency that universally almost everybody likes.
I can agree with that. I mean, they've never really done anything shady going on.
Well, I'm sure there are some shady things going on because most everything they do is probably defense related, really. And then they do things like this. They go, oh, isn't it lovely? NASA's making sheet music out of a radio telescope
data. Give them the razzle dazzle and they'll never be wise.
Exactly. But no, that's still cool, though.
I think it'd be fun to kind of look at it. She described it as telling, let me see, the lady who's writing it, composer Sophie Kastner and her team are writing it. She says it's like writing a fictional story that's largely based on real facts. We're taking the data from space that has been translated into sound and putting a new and human twist on it. The pilot program focuses on data from a small region at the center of our Milky Way, where a supermassive black hole resides.
Interesting.
And sort that supermassive black hole song. That's all I can hear.
Now, will the music be available on the Spotify?
From what I can see is anybody, if you want to record it and put it on the Spotify, it looks like they're putting it into this section. Now, the other one you could probably find, but this section is mostly sheet music, and then you take it and play it however you want, Tim.
Interesting. I can put it in my player piano, for example.
Yes. But it would be cool if somebody out there who's like much better than me, and even I can even say Tim on this one. I can read sheet music, but I'm not a great actual instrumentalist, could actually play it for us. I think that'd be fun.
That would be interesting. I mean, I wouldn't have a clue. Even if it was in guitar tablature, I'd struggle with it and trying to figure it all out.
Well, I'm looking at it and it's written on a 4x4, and I mean it looks pretty interesting, but it doesn't look easy. I'm not gonna lie, Tim. I see a lot of fast, intricate notes going up and down on it. But it's kind of cool because there's a lot of rest in it too. But yeah, I would just be curious if somebody else could pick that up. This is called Where Parallel Lines Converge. This is the name of this one.
Interesting. Did I ever tell you I once went to a radio telescope in West Virginia?
Bowling or whatever it is, that big white thing.
Yeah, it's is it West? I think it's West Bank Radio Telescope in West Virginia. The interesting thing is it's one of these communities that has no radio transmissions, or cell phones don't work. You're not allowed to have Wi-Fi or anything because it messes up the radio telescope. Even to the point when you drive near the radio telescope, which they took us to on a tour, they have to use diesel vehicles, not gasoline vehicles, because apparently the spark plugs in a gasoline vehicle affect the radio telescope.
Huh. I wonder, I guess it's just energy in some way. I never really thought about it.
Yeah, but it was a very interesting tour that we took of the radio telescope.
I've never been, but I've heard a few people talk about it since, I lived in Southwest Virginia most of my life, and I've seen the pictures. And just so you know, Tim, the piece, the Where Parallel Lines Converge, was recorded by a Montreal-based orchestra. Why couldn't I say orchestra? I don't know what I was trying to get out, Tim, but it wasn't the right word. Anyway, in July, so a bunch of people playing instruments in July did record this at McGill University. So there's also, if you want to Google that, guys, it's McGill University, and it's where parallel lines converge, if you want to hear one of the pieces of music.
There we are. I'm sure coming to a hit clip somewhere near you.
Yes, that's what's going to, I don't know why I couldn't say orchestra. Like, I looked at the word, my brain knew what the word was, but it did not come out the way. Tim's looking at me like, are you okay? Anyway, what was your piece of music news, Tim?
Okay, my piece of music news is Barry Manilow. Now, Barry Manilow is not someone that we've really spoken about on this podcast, but he's a legend. He's a songwriting legend. And as we know, Barry Manilow is somebody who got his start writing jingles for commercials. And a lot of the jingles of the 70s all came from the world of Barry Manilow.
I mean, I kind of knew that, but I didn't know how in depth it went.
Yeah, I have a live album of his, and he does like a medley on there of all of his commercial jingles. And it's like, really? Barry Manilow wrote that one, and that one, and that one, and Coke, and KFC, and blah, 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 blah. And very, very, very interesting. Anyhow, what's interesting about Barry Manilow is that he's had a residency at the Westgate in Las Vegas. Now, the Westgate used to be the Las Vegas Hilton.
Yeah.
And he has just broken the record set by Elvis Presley, because Elvis Presley has a residency there, and he held the record for the most amount of shows at the Hilton, or I think it's called the International at the time, and then it became the Hilton. But Barry Manilow has just broken Elvis's record.
Oh, good job, Barry Manilow. I mean, he's got to be in his 80s, right?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, how old is Manilow? I mean, he's looking good, but...
Yeah, he looks pretty good, but I mean, he's been around forever, because, like, I always think of this, there's this movie, I don't know what it's called, I can't think of the name of it, and it's not Drive Me Crazy, it's like an old 2000s party movie, but anyway, the guy's obsessed with a girl named Amanda, and he's convinced that this Amanda girl is, like, in love with him, and they're going, of course, when he gets in the car, Mandy comes on the radio, and he goes, see, I told you guys, Mandy, Amanda. And I always think about that scene whenever I think of Barry Manilow.
Well, with Manilow, Elvis played 636 shows at the Hilton or the Westgate or the International, as it was known back in Elvis's day.
Yeah.
And just recently, Manilow played his 637th show there. So he has broken the record of the king.
Huh. I mean, I've seen him perform. Like, they say he puts on a heck of a good show.
So I understand. I know people have seen him and said he was absolutely fantastic. And the interesting thing is that when Manilow, on the day he broke the record, he covered the song Hound Dog, and he was wearing a red jacket, and he had the Elvis Taking Care of Business logo stitched onto the arm. You know, he was paying his tribute to the king of rock and roll.
That's nice. That's cute. I mean, and because you do kind of think, when you think of Vegas, what thinks synonymously with Vegas? It's Elvis.
Oh, Elvis in the white jumpsuit.
And later Elvis with those, the glasses are what got me. I couldn't take the glasses.
Yeah, I mean, I had a pair of those Elvis Vegas glasses, and I bought them in Vegas in like a touristy type shop for sunglasses, and they were gold, and I had them for a while.
We need to see pictures, photographical evidence, Tim.
I think they must be somewhere. Actually, I know where they are. I have a picture of me dressed as David Hasselhoff.
Of course.
Like some kind of fancy dress type party. And I'm wearing those very same glasses.
That's very on brand. It's always the Hoff.
100%.
Someone else popped up the other day where we were talking about Hasselhoff, and all I could ever think, I was like, oh, where's Tim when I need him?
Well, I will have you know it's Saturday, and I have not watched my Knight Rider episode yet. So if I'm a little on edge, that's why.
It's slacking.
Well, there we go. Well, that wraps up our music news section. Now, this week it is Joy's topic. I don't know her topic. So what do you have for us, Joy?
So it took me a little bit to figure out what I wanted to do for this week's episode, but I decided I wanted to do an album episode. It's not an album that I told Tim ahead of time, because he's very, very familiar with this album.
Okay.
Very familiar with this band, and I would be shocked if he knows more about it than I do, and probably will be true. We're going to talk about Revolver, the Beatles album. The reason I want to talk about Revolver is, well, first of all, it's their seventh studio album by the Beatles, for those who don't know. And it's kind of known for, it has a lot of interesting facts that went into this album. And it's one of my, if it's not my favorite, it's definitely top 2 Beatles album favorites. So I just went back and did a little bit of research on the album. I'll start by that, and then we'll just go song by song. There is a distinct difference in this album in what was released in the UK and what was released in the US. In the UK, I think it was, 13, 14 songs, but in the US, it was only 11.
Yes, because at the time the Beatles were on Capitol Records. I think they were still on Capitol Records, even later on into their career. But at the very beginning of the Beatles' career, the UK albums and the US albums were completely different. And Capitol used to package lots of different songs and then release it as a completely different type of album in the United States that supposedly was tuned to the US market. And only as you got later through the Beatles' career, the UK and the US releases tied up. And I think at this point now, the UK albums are considered the definitive when it comes to the Beatles. But certainly back then, it was a completely separate thing.
Exactly. So in the UK, the album's 14 tracks were gradually distributed to radio stations in the weeks before its release. In North America, it was reduced to 11 songs by Capitol Records, as Tim was saying, with the 3 omitted songs later appearing in June of 1966 on an LP, Yesterday and Today. So they did a substantial release later for the US-based thing. This album came out August 5th, 1966. And it coincided with a very famous thing, ironically, where John Lennon made the remark that they were more popular than Jesus. As this album came out, it coincided with all that media that was happening, which no publicity is bad publicity to me. So it kind of works.
Yeah, so something that I'm sure probably went down very badly in the US market.
I'm sure. I mean, it's still joked about. I don't know if it's still a joke in the UK, but there's a Family Guy episode where he says, I thought it was kind of in bad taste, but now I get it. I feel like I'm, more popular than Jesus and things like that. It's still made fun of to this day.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, in the UK, he might have been more popular than Jesus. I don't know how religious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very outlandish statement to say.
Yeah,
but I think certainly in the UK and in some places, I mean, with Beatlemania at its peak, I mean, he's probably not speaking completely out of turn, but also not being terribly respectful, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, and I think that this is one thing that America versus UK, it was probably more cheeky or tongue-in-cheek than it was, you know what I'm saying? Whereas America probably took it and ran with it because we make ridiculousness out of everything.
Sure, absolutely 100%.
But anyway, so this was it. So it also, whenever it was released on August 5th, 1966, it accompanied a double-side single, Elenor, Rigby, Yellow Submarine. The album was the Beatles' final recording project before their retirement as live performers. It marked the most overt use of studio technology to date. And we're going to talk about that. And then next was obviously Rubber Soul that was released, which just kind of progressed. So I don't know what Tim's favorite Beatles albums are, but this one specifically is one that I really like where they changed.
Yeah, I mean, Revolver and Rubber Soul for many are considered like a pair. It's not the same album, but they sort of come as a set. I mean, Sgt. Pepper is the album which I probably grew up with because that's what my parents had and used to play a lot.
That's true.
But probably my favorite Beatles album is Abbey Road, especially the side B of Abbey Road. I have the box set of that, which has got all the outtakes and a book and all that kind of stuff. But I would probably say the best of the Beatles. No, that's an Alan Partridge quote. No, I would probably say Abbey Road.
Abbey Road. There we go. So this probably ranks up there. I think Abbey Road is my other top pick, Tim. I struggle. It really depends on my mood. If I'm kind of wanting that more upbeat Beatles or if I'm wanting that more, I guess, where they were going for the counterculture Beatles.
Yes.
So with Revolver, what was interesting, so from what I've read, is they really incorporated the recording studio in this album like they had never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tim might be able to explain this better than I can. But basically, they did a lot of double dubbing. So they like recorded through and then placed the sound over the sound and played it back through. So they were recording as they were performing these songs in the studio, and they'd use that to double on themselves. And I guess that wasn't a really popular thing to do with the Beatles at that time, but that was kind of the start of this different kind of tone to them. So what happened is at the time, you could only record 4 tracks at once in a recording studio. So what you'd have to do is record, let's say you'd record your drums, your bass, and your rhythm guitar on 3 of those tracks. And then you'd bounce those down to 1 track and then remove them. So then you have a 1 track which has got your bass, your drums, and your guitar on it. And then you would do again, and you'd bounce and bounce and bounce. And that's how you would build up multi-track recording. But of course, once you've committed to bouncing it down, that's exactly how it is, and that's exactly how it's going to stay. Now, around the time of Revolver and Rubber Soul, they started getting into using 2 4-track machines synced together. It's like 2 leap it's called automatic double tracking. And it's like 2 tape recorders automatically creating a double vocal track or a double whatever you want in the background.
ADT, what ADT is doing is it's putting an ever so slight delay on a vocal, and then it sounds like there's more than one person singing it.
Yep. And so that's kind of what they're saying in a way that they wanted when they started making this album. The way they conceptualized it is that the studio was an instrument in and of itself.
Yeah,
and that was interesting.
Yeah, they were very big pioneers of that. Now, of course, these days, anyone who spends $99 on an audio interface that gets the free software, you can do all that stuff at home on the lowest spec computer you could ever imagine. But back in 1966, I mean, this was big news that they were able to do this. And they say, using the studio as an instrument itself.
I thought that was just a cool concept. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but they said that was like their big thing. We're going to get into the actual songs, which I'm sure Tim is very familiar with. The first song for side 1, we're going to go with the UK version because that's, like he said, the definitive version at this point. Mm-hmm. And it is Taxman, which is perfect for the UK.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is, the UK has always had a rich heritage of taxing people incredibly heavily.
Yep.
And in fact, as we know from our U.S. civics training, one of the reasons that the United States moved away from the United Kingdom and the King was because of high taxation. And even to this day, with VAT being 20% and council tax and duty on fuel and tax, that is pretty much how the UK has continued to be set up. Now, in the 60s, this tax was incredibly high, as it always has been. But I think particularly during this period, the government was taxing rich people very heavily. So, of course, the Beatles, earning the money that they were earning, were being absolutely taxed to death. And this is what this song is about. And in fact, you know, like you have the Rolling Stones when their album In Exile, where they all became tax exiles and lived in the south of France for a while. It's around that kind of era. And, you know, and this is, you know, just them just making a big statement about this taxation business.
So Harrison wrote Taxman as a protest song, so Tim's correct, about the marginally high tax paid by top earners like the Beatles. This was under Harold Wilson's Labor government. Mm-hmm. It amounted to 95% of unearned income they had to pay, you know, above the top threshold. So like they were paying like a 95% tax to. The song spoke, Count In is out of tempo with the, so basically, hold on one second. The song spoken Count In is out of tempo with the performance that follows. Do you know what I'm talking about, Tim, what it is at the beginning? And I think that's really cool. It took me a second to say that. And basically they said that was kind of one of the technique that was just something different. They thought it was a cool way to open this album. And I hadn't really heard it in a while, and I pressed play and I'm like, that is a really cool way to open this album. Yeah,
it is cool. And, you know, this song has been covered by so many people, but interesting, the guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan covered Taxman.
I've heard it covered a few different times. I don't know if I've heard his version, though. They also say that this one, the bass part is very reminiscent of a Motown sound. Like that sound's been used throughout Motown, which this would have probably came first, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic McCartney bass line. It has that kind of middly, plummy type of bass where he's playing his Hofner bass. The other interesting thing about this song, the guitar solo on it. A lot of people through the years have said, this is a classic George Harrison solo. George Harrison at the time was not so much playing slide guitar, which he became famous for later on. Mm-hmm. It's a very kind of like spiky sounding solo, which is very reminiscent of everything that George Harrison was doing at the time. The interesting thing is it's Paul McCartney playing it.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Paul McCartney could literally do anything, though. I'm convinced that you could give him any instrument, he'll know how to play it. He could probably copy whatever you give him. I don't know. He's just that person.
Well, like we said on a few episodes back with the new Beatles song, Here and Now, or was it Now and Then? I can't remember. Now and Then, that's the one. The guitar solo on that, again, sounds like classic later era George Harrison with the slide guitar, the phrasing, exactly like George Harrison. And it's Paul McCartney, so I'm just paying tribute to my friends who are playing a bit like him. It's amazing.
Speaking of Paul McCartney, the next song is a song that everybody will be familiar with, and obviously one of the main singles. It is Elenor, Rigby, which is basically a song about being lonely.
Absolutely. And it has 2 chords all the way through.
It does. And it does have such a cool, though, sound. So what they were saying is they chose this to go back and back behind Taxman on purpose because they thought that, in the opinion of Riley's opinion, he's one of the creators of the album, he said the corruption of Taxman and the utter finality of Eleanor's fate make the world of Revolver more ominous than any of their other albums, and that's why they wanted them back to back.
Absolutely. Now, there's been some discussion about where this Elenor Rigby comes from, and I forget where Paul McCartney said it came from. It came from a dream or came from a book or something like that. But there was a graveyard near the school where he grew up that had a gravestone that said Elenor Rigby. And he says he didn't actually get it from that. So, but maybe it was just floating around his head and that's where he pulled Elenor Rigby out from.
I've heard a little bit of both. It doesn't really say. It just says that, it's a character who's an aging spinster and a lonely priest, sermon that no one will hear because that's one of the things. Now, apparently, if you guys don't know this, and I guess I never knew this, Tim probably did, which won't shock anyone, but none of the Beatles are playing on this record.
Yes, absolutely. It's all... It's all classical instruments. It was arranged by George Martin. There's no Beatles playing on this. I mean, you have the vocals, which I assume is Lennon and McCartney, I would assume.
Yes, that's correct.
But yeah, there is no Beatles instrumentation on this at all. It's just classical instruments. It's an orchestra. As I said, George Martin did the arrangement, and that's where it is. But no, I didn't know that.
See, so it says Lennon and Harrison are actually supplying. They're doing the harmonies, and then McCartney's the lead vocal, of course, which we knew. And then it says Martin arranged the track for a string octet. So drawing from an inspiration from a 1960 film score for Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So that's where he got the idea for the sound and the string quartet. Or I guess it's an octet. It's not a quartet.
There we go. Also, this song has had 238 million streams on Spotify. For those
I came across that too.
For those interested in stats. And this song is also featured in the Yellow Submarine film or cartoon film. And having seen that as a very young person, it is so creepy.
Yes. Terrifying, actually.
Yeah, and I remember Hannah saying to me when she used to rent it on VHS from the library, she used to think it was like really, really creepy and like scary almost.
It kind of is. And if you go back and watch it, like the characters are terrifying. The way they make their body motions look, Tim, I don't know. There's something very off about it, but I feel like that's on purpose. So
yeah, it's very, I'm thinking about it now and it is very creepy.
It is very creepy. If I woke up in the middle of the night and that were playing on my TV, I would probably scream.
Exactly.
But anyway, so speaking of sleeping, the next song is I'm Only Sleeping. And this song is quoted. I want you to hear this quote before you say anything, Tim. This is an author who did a whole book on this album. And he says, I'm only sleeping is half an acid dream and half Lennon's laziness personified. I thought that was kind of an interesting way of describing it.
One thing that's interesting about this song, and this is something that you see a little bit more in music and songwriting later on and even now, this song doesn't have an introduction. It is straight in.
Oh, you're right. I hadn't thought about that till you said it.
Straight in with the vocal when it starts.
And that's kind of not what the Beatles ever did. You're right. I didn't think about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The other thing that this track has is it has a backwards guitar solo.
That is what I was going to tell you about. But if you know about it, Tim, I'll let you tell them. I don't know how to explain it. But yes, they said there is a backwards guitar solo and a papery old man voice.
Yeah, so all you would do is you would play the track in reverse, record to it with the machine running backwards, and then, of course, when you play it forwards, your guitar solo is then backwards.
I mean, I guess that sounds easy to you, but it sounds not easy to me. But it says it's an Indian style that Harrison played in reverse order during the recording. Martin then reversed the tape, as Tim said, dubbed it to the track, achieving what MacDonald describes as a wombat sucking noises.
Okay.
I don't know why he describes it as that, guys. I don't think I would think wombat noises, though. That quote's not for me.
I've seen a wombat in a zoo, and I don't recall it making any noises that sounded like a Beatles song.
I mean, I don't know a whole lot about wombats, but whatever. That's what he wants to say. That's what he wants to say. Another quote says this song was this does give part of the half-acid dream. Suspend the laws of time and motion to simulate the half-coherent state between wakefulness and sleepfulness. That kind of sounds like a half-acid dream with Lennon's laziness personified.
There we are. Well, a paltry 57 million streams on Spotify, sadly.
Anyway, wombat sucking noises. I don't know why he said that. Anyway, guys, that's not my quote. The next song is one that I find very interesting. It is Love You Too.
Okay.
So basically, it's Harrison's kind of first step into the Indian Hindu classical music that he did for a while as a composer. Of course, you had Norwegian Wood in 1965. He recorded the track with only minimal contributions from Starr and McCartney and no input at all from John Lennon. Basically, Indian musicians from the Asian Music Circle provided the instrumentals. And this is where I think we talked about it in the episode that posted today, but you guys won't. It'll be like 4 episodes when you finally hear this one. It's got like the sitar and the tabla and tambourine. I don't even know how to say those words. A bunch of cool instruments, everybody. Da 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 da. I don't know. I can't say those words, but a bunch of you've heard this song, I'm sure, right, Tim?
100%. So yeah, at the time, George Harrison was very much into Indian culture, Indian music. And, at some point, all the Beatles went to India to study meditation and all that kind of stuff. But George Harrison was definitely the leader of that, of being engrossed in Indian culture and music. Yeah. And this song has tabla in it. And I said it has sitar in it as well. And later on, I think the next, after this pair of albums, of course, you have Sergeant Pepper, which has With Him, Without You, which again builds on that kind of like Indian sound and the sitar and everything. But yes, this one is probably the point where the Beatles enter into that kind of Indian music style. And
so they say that, of course, he plays the sitar on here, which me and Tim established, but they said that he also included his fuzzy tone electric guitar sound. I don't know what a fuzz tone is. What is that, Tim?
Okay, so what a lot of people do when you plug your guitar into an amplifier, modern amplifiers have a lot of distortion and overdrive built in the amplifiers. But back then, they didn't have that. So what you'd have a box that goes between your amp and your guitar, which would give you an overdrive sound. Now, these days, much of these overdrive sounds that you get are very smooth sounding. So when they clip, if you look at them if you look at the distortion on an oscilloscope, it's very, very smooth.
Yeah.
But at the time, the way the technology was, it wasn't so easy to achieve that. So you'd have things like germanium transistors in pedals, and it would create what they call square wave clipping. So it's very fuzzy and like buzz tone distortion.
Okay.
And there's a very famous distortion box called a Big Muff. And the Big Muff is famous for creating a big fuzz tone, famously used by Jimi Hendrix. David Gilmour used a fuzz tone on some of the Pink Floyd stuff. And it just creates a very kind of distinctive, incredibly fuzzy rather than smooth sounding distortion. One famous example of a fuzz pedal would be the opening of Satisfaction, that bam, 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 bam. It's very kind of harsh sounding.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Huh. I mean, I assumed because it's called fuzz tone, but I figured you could explain it better than I could. And I've heard this song before, and I know what you're saying now. So, and that's kind of like, that leads into our next song, which I just found out. I did not realize that this song was actually inspiration was built for this song from the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, God Only Knows. And this song is Here, There, and Everywhere. And it was written by Paul McCartney.
Yeah, I can see where they would be influenced by Pet Sounds. Now, everyone says that Sgt. Pepper was completely influenced by Pet Sounds, but I've listened to Pet Sounds many times, and I'm sure your sister will probably once again criticize me for this. I don't really see the connection, and I didn't think Pet Sounds was all that.
So what's interesting you say that is this says, in turn, Brian Wilson has said many times that he was actually inspired to write Pet Sounds after Rubber Soul. So it all goes full circle, Tim. Chicken or the egg? I don't know.
Interesting. But yeah, this is a song that has harmonies that are very reminiscent of the Beach Boys.
Yeah, so it's a double track vocal, and then I guess they're playing it, resulting in that higher pitch in the playback, because it's like there's double track. There's a very high pitch in the background, which is McCartney's voice. I'm assuming doing both of those. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this one does have that intro where the song, like the opening lines are sung in like a free time, whereas the rest of the song's a 4x4. And you could tell that kind of creates a cool intro to the sound. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's lots of production stuff that went on these Beatles songs, which is now seen completely as the norm. But, they were very much rule breakers back then, especially with George Martin. The thing is that you forget about George Martin. He was over the Parlophone label, and they were on Parlophone, EMI Parlophone, and Parlophone was a classical label, and he was pretty much exclusively working with classical musicians. So like when he got together with the Beatles, yes, he was bringing in the things like string arrangements and what have you, but he was way ahead of his time, and for someone who came out that sort of classical music ilk, he was breaking barriers with this equipment, working with the Beatles.
Yeah, like I said, they said that their credit is 9 things came out of this album that had never been used on a record. I just thought that was such a high number. I mean, I knew they did some cool stuff, Tim, but I wouldn't have thought that. Just different techniques. So the next song, speaking of cool songs, is one that everybody should be familiar with. And this is a child song. It is Starr's vocal spot on the album. It is Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, the famous Yellow Submarine. Now, I've loved this song for years and years. I always loved the Yellow Submarine film, which I mentioned to you before. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this song, children love it. Adults love it. Everything is great. And I feel so lucky that when I saw Ringo Starr at the Roanoke Civic Center 5 years ago or whenever it was, Ringo Starr sang Yellow Submarine live, and I heard him sing it. Yeah. And the thing is, Ringo is not a good singer. Like, let's face it, he is not really a good singer.
But he can do what he wants.
Yeah, but he's Ringo Starr, for goodness sake. He was a drummer in the Beatles.
Yeah.
But when he sang it at the Civic Center, it was like hearing it off the record. I mean, it was like nothing had changed. And it's like, there he is. There's Ringo Starr standing on stage singing Yellow Submarine. I mean, I would have been happy with that concert if that's all that happened.
Well, and I think I knew this, but I've kind of refreshed my brain on it. Donovan, the Scottish singer, actually helped write the lyrics for this song.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't know. I mean, I've heard his music, or Donovan, whatever you call it, the Scottish one. Yeah, apparently he helped write all the lyrics for Yellow Submarine.
There we are. Did he come up with the bit? till we found the sea of green.
I don't know. I didn't get that. He just says that it's the tale of life of a sea voyage accompanied by friends. That's what he's quoted as saying about the song.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the image of the yellow submarine as well. It is so incredibly iconic. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I wanted to do in this house, and I haven't done in this house, and in hindsight, I don't know where I'd put it. I wanted to have a painted wall mural of the yellow submarine up on one of the walls, and I thought that'd be so cool. You know, you could get a really high quality image. You could grid it all out and then get it drawn out on the wall. Hannah's an incredibly good artist. I mean, she doesn't. I wish she would draw more, but she doesn't. But she's a very good artist. She could work the whole thing out, and we could paint it on the wall, and we would have a huge yellow submarine on the wall. That was one of the things I really wanted in this house, and as of yet, we haven't done that.
Well, you know, the life is still young, Tim. You're only 27. You got this.
Exactly. The other thing about the yellow submarine is that if you've ever been to Vegas and you've ever seen the Beatles Love Cirque du Soleil show, I've been lucky. I think I've seen it 3 times or twice. I can't remember. 2 or 3 times. I can't remember. But there's a bit in the show, and I forget which song it is, but the whole of the stage area gets covered in this huge, big, like silk. It's like a parachute almost, and it covers the whole stage. And then all you see inside this silk is like silhouettes and lighting and all this kind of stuff. And then depending on where you sit, it only happened one time. It didn't happen on one of the other times I was there. You see a projection of the yellow submarine on the silk, and it only happens for like a second. And I was like, it's the yellow submarine.
Tim just starts clapping. Everybody, look.
I was so pleased.
I mean, I guess I have a Beatles hallway because downstairs, when you come in, when you walk into my house, the stairs are right there. Your kitchen's right here. And then, it's an open plan. So it leads into the living room. And then you've got like the back, and then you can come up the stairs. But in my hallway going down, I have, but the entire hallway is all just Beatles memorabilia. I've got band posters. I got the big picture Tim gave me. My mom gave me this really cool framed Abbey Road album that like the playlist is like up on the wall. And so I guess my hallway I didn't mean for it to be, but it became the Beatles hallway.
Yeah. We had that huge, it's like a big black and white picture of the Beatles in the 70s. And we're always at the very end of their career almost. It's like a very iconic black and white photograph of the Beatles. And it was in our apartment for a long time. And then when we moved into this house, we probably could have found somewhere to put it. And we had it up in one place, but it was quite heavy.
It's
and
very
we didn't
heavy.
know what to do with it. And we was almost going to throw it out. And I mentioned it to Joy, and she's like, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I was ready to go. So it's in the hallway and then all the other stuff. And I didn't need to, but I have a Beatles hallway.
There we are. And that picture came from Bed Bath & Beyond, by the way.
In case anybody was wondering. Which is it? Did they shut down, right?
Yeah, Bed Bath & Beyond is gone. They went bankrupt. It was another one of those songs, another one of those shops that didn't really have a unique selling point.
Yep.
Because their pricing was, whatever, but there was nothing unique that meant you wanted to go there. Nothing that you couldn't get in Target or Walmart for probably the same price.
There's just and it's one of those shops that you go in and yes, you can buy stuff, but do you really need anything in there? No. It's, you know what I'm saying, Ted? You don't, Bed Bath & Beyond had candles and pillows and fun stuff like that. But it's do I actually need any of this? Not really.
No, they had a huge section for wall art, which is why we got that Beatles picture.
Yeah.
And like you say, they sell bedding, and there's also selling vinyl records in there for a while. And then they would sell stuff like As Seen on TV. And it's just like...
Some football that sings.
Yeah. Why would I buy anything in this shop?
Yeah, and it literally looked like when you walked in, they just threw everything in it. I don't know. I was in a big bed. I was in there a few times. I have a big Breakfast at Tiffany's Audrey Hepburn picture that's pretty similar, about the same size and weight. And I think I may have got that there. That's downstairs in the living room. So there you go. Anyway, so moving on, we're going to go to another kind of thing. So, Yellow Submarine's got that all light kind of happy atmosphere. And then we go into a raging guitar, which is, she said, oh my God, it's a tongue twister is what it is. She said.
Yeah, I think the opening guitar is backwards guitar as well. I think.
Probably, I didn't see anything that specifically said it, but it's definitely distinct.
Absolutely. And like the opening line of this song, I just pulled the lyrics up because I just to see if I could remember it. It says, "She said, I know what it's like to be dead, and I know what it's like to be sad. And she's making me feel like I've never been born." I mean, that's a very dark lyric.
And this one was written by John Lennon, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah,
this is a Lennon song. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the Beatles songwriting partnership, often it will say Lennon and McCartney, but it'll be very clearly a Lennon song or very clearly a McCartney song.
So apparently that when they were writing it, so it's like a 4x4, and then at one point it shifts to like a 3x4 in the sound. They said Harrison recalled that he had helped Lennon finish the composition, which involved joining 3 separate fragments of the song. Having walked out of the session, McCartney may or may not have contributed the bass to the recording. I guess it's up for debate who's actually playing bass, because he got mad at him and left because they were in their, musicians stage where they're all mad at each other. And then it says, in addition to lead guitar and many vocal harmonies, Harrison possibly performed the bass guitar. Apparently, one person says Harrison did it, one person says McCartney did it, and it's still up for debate who's actually playing the bass part.
Yeah, you find that with Beatles songs, is that you will find that it was Lennon playing bass or McCartney playing drums. It's just because all of them were multi-instrumentalists. Yeah. Well, I think apart from Ringo, who played drums and sang, and then that was about it. But he was Ringo, of course. He was in the Beatles. It's fine. But of the 3 stringed instrument musicians, all of them could play everything.
Makes sense. I mean, yeah, they're the type of people that you could just put an instrument in front of them and they would do it. So supposedly the lyric was inspired by a conversation Lennon and Harrison had with Peter Fonda in LA in 1965, which I thought that sounds very Beatles story. It says, while all 3, along with Starr and the members of the Byrds, were under the influence of recreational drugs, just so we don't say, yeah.
It's the 60s, man. It's the 60s.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I don't want to say it, but Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Yeah, that is a painting by Julian Lennon that he did at school.
Yeah, and so what happened was during the conversation, Fonda commented, "I know what it's like to be dead." There's where it comes from. Because as a child, he had technically died during an operation and came back to life.
There we go.
Well, I got dark real quick. We went from Yellow Submarine down. All right. So the next song so we're going to the second side. And this one is a very much more happy, written by McCartney song. And it is Good Day, Sunshine. Yeah,
this is a great song. It's got that very distinctive "Good Day, Sunshine."
It's been used in a lot of movies too.
Yeah, and it's such an up lyric as well. I mean, I'll say again, I've just pulled the lyrics up for this song too, and it's very up, it's very happy, and it's all a very very positive sounding song.
So what he's credited as saying is it was an unusually hot and sunny English summer, which, in the UK, I learned that they don't believe in AC, and it's not always that warm. As we've talked about. But anyway, so basically the song was supposed to convey the first day of spring just after you've fallen in love. And he does say that it does draw from some vaudeville kind of sounds. And he also acknowledged that there was an influence of the band, The Loving Spoonful, which we've talked about on the podcast, are kind of in the composition. So that's where the background of this song comes from.
Yeah, it must have been a very unusual day in the UK to be hot and sunny. So they wrote this song.
Well, the Beatles can write a song in like 5 minutes. So it was hot and sunny. And then by the end of the day, it was pouring rain. I don't know.
I think that's probably the case.
I feel like I could be crazy, Tim, but I've heard stories. I feel like the Beatles are the people you could put a piece of paper in front of, and unless it's John Lennon. But in McCartney, you could put a piece of paper in front of him. He could write you a song and just hand it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, when you are a musical genius like Paul McCartney, you can do things like that.
But then John Lennon would still be fighting with the lyrics for the next 7 years, is what I hear. But anyway.
Yeah, well, John Lennon had a lot of demons going on in his head, I think.
I think that he was an over-perfectionist, and I don't know. That's just the perspective. Now, to be fair, it's not like I knew him. I didn't have first-hand accounts with him or anything, Tim. This is all I've heard about the riverbed. He seemed to be somebody who was fighting a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I shared the same time in history as John Lennon. Of course, I never met John Lennon, but I was alive when John Lennon was alive. And as I probably told you, I remember the news when John Lennon was shot and killed. I remember I was living in Hounslow. We was living on the Staines Road above Templeton TV on the Staines Road. And we used to have that television in the corner of the room. And it was like the 6 o'clock news on BBC, I believe. And I remember that it was like breaking news. John Lennon, Beatle, has been shot and killed. I remember that happening.
I mean, I've been to the place where he was shot and killed. Like I visited outside of the apartment complex, and then I've been to the Imagine thing and all that kind of stuff. And it just, and then I love when Paul McCartney is quoted as saying, he was standing up for, he wanted to work on, gun violence in America. And he's quoted as saying, well, I had a friend who died of gun violence. And like, you didn't really think about it, but it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible waste of somebody. It really was. I mean, who knows if we would have ever seen more stuff from the Beatles? I don't know.
And it was just like a horrible, like right in front of your apartment complex, just in the middle of the street for everybody to see. Yeah,
it's at the Dakota, Central Park West. And like you say, you have Central Park office off to the side. What you have now is the Imagine mural and Strawberry Fields and all that kind of stuff there. But it is, you're in front of the Dakota building, and it's just a thoroughfare. It's just a road in front of there.
Yeah.
And so that Mark David Chapman just shot him in broad, it wasn't in broad daylight, but it was out, right in the street in front of everyone.
There's plenty of people walking around. I'm sure you're right by Central Park.
Yeah.
Anyway, so moving along, let's go back to the music because it's very sad. So the next song is "And Your Bird Can Sing."
Yes.
Which was primarily written by Lennon. McCartney is quoted as saying he did help. He estimates the song's about 80% Lennon, 20% to him. And Harrison and McCartney played dual lead guitar parts on this.
Yeah, I think they're probably both playing 12 strings. I would probably think, because it has that.
I don't know. It doesn't really say, but I mean, it does. That makes sense just based off of what you hear.
Yeah. I mean, they're probably playing Rickenbackers or something like that, or at least it's something like an Epiphone Casino or whatever the Beatles guitars of that era were.
I mean, I'm not familiar enough, you know me, but I do know this. According to what they've said is that the song is actually directed at Frank Sinatra after Lennon had read an article on the Singer and Esquire in which Sinatra was lauded as the fully emancipated male, the man who can have anything he wants. Okay. Apparently that's what the song's about. I would have never gotten that, Tim, like even a little bit.
No, absolutely not. I've pulled the lyrics up again here, and I would have not come to that conclusion. But
the Beatles can write a song about anything, I guess. I mean, and your bird can sing, I guess, because Frank Sinatra could sing.
Oh, Blue Eyes. He was quite the singer. I don't know.
I mean, who knows? I also read something that said it was about the rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but I couldn't confirm that either. And that seemed a little early.
In real life, there was no rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They were friends. They used to hang out. They used to play all the same clubs and knew all the same people. It was something that was created in the press for effect, basically.
Marketing.
Yeah.
Good old marketing. All right. So the next song is For No One, which was inspired by McCartney's relationship with Jane Asher. Along with Good Day Sunshine. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I would say he was seeing Jane Asher at the time.
Yep. It says, along with Good Day Sunshine, which similarly dispensed guitar parts between Harrison and Lennon in this song. So they're both playing. And basically, it's just a cute song. I mean, I don't really have a lot to say about it, but it's a sweet song. I don't know that I'd heard this song kind of on the radio or anything of that nature, Tim. It's not one that you'd hear. You have to kind of seek it out, especially in America. I don't know how many songs that were popular with the Beatles in the UK weren't as popular in America. I don't know, but it's a sweet song. And that's pretty much it. I've only heard it a few times, if I'm being quite frank with you.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I like to listen to albums in their entirety, so
Yeah.
I've heard it many, many times. The interesting thing about this particular song is that when I was at school, at Lambton School in Hounslow, in our music class, my music teacher, Miss Frank, once set us an assignment to write a song using pre-existing lyrics. So she gave us lyrics, and then she said, "What I want you to do is write chords around it," and it was this song.
Oh, that's cute, Tim. Was this the one she picked, or did you pick, like, she gave you guys this song?
Yeah, she gave us, like, I think a chorus and a verse from the song, and then tasked us with writing chords that fitted around it.
That's interesting. I mean, I've listened to this album from beginning to end, but I'm going to be honest that this is not one of the songs that's particularly stuck out to me. It's just the truth. But there is a French horn in it, and apparently it was the Philharmonic Orchestra has parts in it, and there was like an overdubbing session that Martin did to get those added.
Yeah, I think does it have a harpsichord in there as well?
Probably. That sounds right. Let's see. The principal horn player for the Philharmonic, best part. Doesn't say, Tim. You could be onto something, though.
Yeah, it has that sort of sound. I mean, maybe
bass in a clavichord. C-A-L. So it's spelled C-L-A-V-I, and then it's chord. Maybe that's what you're talking about, Tim.
Yeah. Maybe not a harpsichord. A clavichord is probably some variation of harpsichord.
It's a string rectangular keyboard instrument. Yeah. It's basically from the Middle Ages.
Yeah, the difference between a piano and a harpsichord, a piano, a little hammer hits the strings.
Yeah.
A harpsichord plucks the strings. And that's why it sounds very different.
Yeah, that makes sense. And McCartney is the one playing that, because, as I said, you could probably put any instrument in front of him and somehow he'd know how to play it.
Well, of course.
He's just one of those people. Like, he's kind of like we joke about with Brian May. Like, when I learn stuff about him, it's just like one thing right after the next, right after the next.
Exactly.
Now, the next song was written by John Lennon, which would come as no surprise to anybody, and this is Dr. Roberts. Though there is some debate, because McCartney claims he did co-author it, though it's not formally said that he can. Or he did. Not formally said that he didn't. Apparently the guitar is still in the same style as the And Your Bird Can Sing. And its lyrics celebrate, a New York physician for dispensing amphetamine injections to his patients.
Yes, I would imagine this wasn't the kind of medical doctor that you'd go and see for any kind of normal ailment. I thought it was probably a drug dealer or something of that ilk. Yeah,
and it would make 110%. I would say Lennon wrote most of this song. As soon as you hear it, it sounds like a very John Lennon song of the 60s.
Exactly. He says, "You're a new and better man. He helps you to understand. He does everything he can, Dr. Robert."
Yeah. Well, I mean, he gives you amphetamines by injection.
There we are.
I wonder if it was a real doctor who was doing that, Tim, or if it was a made-up doctor. That's what I'm not sure.
I don't know. I'm sure it was making reference to someone that the Beatles knew very intimately at the time.
Well, there is 2 bridge sections, and there is a pump organ being used in this one.
Wouldn't surprise me. The Beatles use something very unusual and untraditional instruments in their instrumentation. Like I said, they sort of pioneered using orchestras on pop records, and to have harpsichords and clavichords and all this kind of stuff on a pop record was very on brand for the Beatles at the time.
Yes. So the next one is written by Harrison. It is I Want to Tell You. And he says the song is an avalanche of thoughts that he had found hard to express. He supports the lyrics with a stammering guitar riff and tried to create a dissonance, like a melody or like a dissonance between the song and the guitar.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a track which Harrison plays on the famous Live in Japan album. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard that. He did a tour of Japan with Eric Clapton, and they released a live album. And for many years, it was only available as an import. And I remember my friend Hogg had a copy of it. And I made a copy of his CD and actually recorded it onto a mini disc when I was at his house one time. And it was very good because, I mean, no one had ever heard this. And it's like, wow, you had to order it specially and all this kind of stuff. But it's now on the Spotify and all that kind of stuff. But he does a version of that live with Eric Clapton playing guitar on it.
I'm going to have to go hunt that down because that sounds kind of interesting. I'm not super, I mean, I've listened to this song a few times, but I've not listened to that specific show. So I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah, very, very famous concert available on the Spotify. George Harrison live in Japan. It's up there in my, top however many iconic albums that I really love.
The list just keeps getting longer, so Tim doesn't know what the number is. Top 47, top 27, who knows?
Well, what a lot of it boils down to, they were albums that I used to have when I had my CD collection before I sold it all off in the early 2000s. And even after that, there's certain albums that I really love that have become iconic for me. Yeah. And even things like the one I gave you, the Blue Man Group, Live at the Venetian. Again, almost impossible to find. It was a iTunes only release that I bought, and there's certain albums that are so iconic for me, and I always come back to them.
Yep. And that's why I picked to talk about Revolver, because I feel like this is one of those albums for me. So the next one is a song that I love, and I recently found out probably the reason I love it is because it was influenced by Motown. It is "Got to Get You Into My Life." Which makes sense if you've heard it. It does sound like it was influenced by Motown.
Yeah, it does have that Motown vibe to it, the orchestration of the track, even just the way that it's written. And again, this is another McCartney. I think this is a McCartney vocal.
Yes. He says it was written by McCartney after he had seen Stevie Wonder perform at the Scotch of St. James nightclub in February. The horn players on the track include members of George Frame's group, the Blue Flames. Basically, to capture the desired sound, microphones were placed on the bells of brass instruments, and then the signals were heavily limited. A month later, a tape copy of these horn parts were superimposed with a slight delay, therefore doubling the presence of the bass contributions. And that's how they try to create an R&B sound. That's a lot of technical stuff there, everybody.
Yeah, they were very pioneering in the way that they mic'd instruments. Certainly, it's Sergeant Pepper was probably the classic example of how they did this. Like you said, they would put microphones in the bell of brass instruments. They would use headphones and use them as microphones. Yeah. They would have microphones in the room away from an instrument and then do weird things with limiting and compressing. And they were trying all this stuff just to create different sounds in the studio, which goes back to what you were saying, how they would use the studio as an instrument itself.
Yeah, and it's just such a cool concept. I had never heard it said like that, but when he said, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. But yeah, so that's kind of, and I will say, even if you've not listened to this album, this is probably one of the songs that you would have heard. Got to Get You Into My Life. It's a pretty popular Beatles song. And then we are on our final track. And this song is another one that I feel like most people would know. It is Tomorrow Never Knows. Yeah,
it has that McCartney, that boom, bing, boom, boom, boom. It's like that kind of octave thing McCartney does. And this is probably one of the first examples of like mainstream avant-garde music. It has sound collages in it. I think it has backwards guitar in it.
It has a reverse guitar.
Yeah, it has all that kind of stuff. And they were sort of going down the path of exploring avant-garde music and things like that. And I think this is sort of the first example of that you hear this on a Beatles track. Now, of course, when you get to the White Album, you have a Revolution number 9, which is avant-garde music, sound collage, whatever you want to call it. But this is probably the start of that path where they were going down that sort of thing in music.
And I don't like it when they go too far. I think this is fun, but when they get too far is when they lose me a little bit. But so basically, the song, Tim's right, it has a reverse guitar, it has pressed vocals, there's a loop tape effect, and a repetitive drum beat. The lyrics are adapted from Timothy Leary's book, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is the most John Lennon thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
100%.
And Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is all I'm going to say about that. And then I hope people get that reference, Tim. It's not about Lucy or the sky or diamonds. But anyway, so Lennon intended the track as an evocation of a Tibetan Buddhist ceremony, because of course he did.
Well, I mean, why wouldn't he?
There is this quote from George Harrison that made me laugh. This is easily the most amazing new thing we've ever come up with. Some people might say it sounds like a terrible mess. But the song ought to be looked at as interesting. If people listen to it with open ears, it's like the Indian stuff. You mustn't listen to Eastern music with a Western ear.
That makes sense. George Harrison also later on in his career spoke about avant-garde music as avant-garde a clue.
I mean, I was like, some people, it might sound crazy, but just listen to it with a fresh set of ears.
Yeah, and it was also covered by Phil Collins on his Face Value album. Yeah, and also David Lee Roth covered a version of this on one of his albums, but he just called it That Beatles Tune, but it is this song.
I don't know why that surprises me too, but it does. It just doesn't seem to fit. It does make it funnier that he calls it That Beatles Tune. I will say, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is the most John Lennon thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, of course.
Anyway, so that is the album. As always, this album is met with tons, like it being one of the greatest albums of all time. It's ranked like number 3 on every list that if not number 1 tip of albums that are influential for the rest of the Beatles' career and music as a whole.
Yeah, and it was recently remixed by Giles Martin. And as I was saying earlier on in the episode, how they had to bounce the tracks down and you ended up with like a master tape which had 3 or 4 things on it and you couldn't, adjust the levels and what have you. Yeah. What they used the same technology that they used for the new Beatles track that came out. So they took the master tapes, run it through this AI software, and then they were able to extract the bass drum, extract the snare drum, extract the vocal, extract this and extract that. And then Giles Martin was able to do a contemporary remix of it because all the instruments are now separate, and the version that you can now get on the Spotify and all the other streaming platforms and what have you has that remix. And if you listen to it in headphones and compare it to the old version, it almost sounds like you're hearing the songs fresh, especially like Elenor Rigby. The whole thing comes alive.
So that was in October of 2022 for those who don't know, and it's called demixing technology. Tim, I just learned that's the term. And there's session recordings, demos, and an EP containing a new mix of Paperback Writer and Ring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't listened to it, I would highly listen to it. Obviously, if you haven't listened to this whole album, I think it's a good album, like Tim was saying, to listen from beginning to end.
Yeah, 100%. The Beatles songs on these albums, especially the later albums, they really should be enjoyed in one sitting. Yes, you can enjoy the hits and Yellow Submarine, Elenor Rigby and all that kind of stuff, but they are designed to be listened to as one complete sort of session, if you will.
And I didn't say it because for those who don't know, we talked about there was 11 tracks in America, 14 tracks. There was in the same session that they did this. They produced a non-album single, which was Paperback Writer, and then Rain also. So that came out of the same session group and the same recording. It just wasn't on either of the American or the UK albums because it was a separate piece.
Yes, absolutely. Just
for clarification, if anybody was wondering where those two come in, it is ranked, like I said, I think it's 5-time platinum. And it's in every major listing of 500 greatest albums that you could find on the Rolling Stones and the interwebs and the YouTubes and all the things.
Exactly. And you will hate to hear this, Joy, but this is the truth.
What's that?
100 years from now, no one's going to be talking about Britney Spears or Lady Gaga, and they're going to be listening to this album.
That's so great. No, I agree with that. And that's why I think it's so important that we bring up like how influential it was. It is what it is. I mean, there may be one person still out there listening, Tim. But you are onto something, because it's 2023, and we're still, quoting all these Beatles stuff on our, and we're still curious where they came up with it. And it's so interesting. If you guys have never went down a deep dive of like how they write music and the way they thought, and just like, it's such an interesting story, Tim. Even if you don't care for their music, their story, like any documentaries I can get my hands on, I love it.
Yeah.
There you go. Do you have anything for the people, Tim?
Just be incredibly kind, and maybe check out Threads. Maybe this is a tip for the week. I've been moving away from the Twitter. I haven't really posted on there. I don't barely look at it anymore. But it seems to be, with current events that have happened at the beginning of November, which I won't dwell on, it seems to be Threads is becoming a thing. Maybe we should have a No Name Musiccast account on Threads. I don't know.
Maybe we just need to make the switch, Tim. It makes sense.
Maybe. Well, we did delete our account off Twitter, so there's no longer a No Name Musiccast account on Twitter because we got rid of it.
I just thought of something. So for those who don't know, Twitter is now X, which is, we're not getting into that, but it's going to be my X here soon. I just realized you can make that reference, Tim. You're going to have to start using that. Anyway, I just thought that was a good joke. All right, bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.